87-year-old town hero faces 4 bikers. His one phone call leaves them speechless. In the quiet town of Willowbrook, where golden fields stretched under wide blue skies, life moved slowly. The air carried the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers, and the streets, lined with tidy brick homes, buzzed with neighborly chatter. Everyone in Willowbrook knew each other, sharing smiles and stories as easily as they shared fresh baked pies. At the heart of town stood Emma's Café, a cozy spot with checkered tablecloths and warm lamplight spilling onto the wooden floors. The cafe's glass door jingled with every visitor, welcoming them into a space filled with the clatter of plates and the rich aroma of brewed coffee. People gathered there to laugh, to talk about the harvest or a new baby born down the road, to feel the pulse of their small community. Among them all, no one was more cherished than Mr. Thomas, a 87-year-old man with a gentle smile and a heart bigger than the hills. Mr. Thomas wasn't just old, he was a piece of Willowbrook's soul. Having lived through its joys and sorrows for decades, folks admired him not only for his service in the war long ago but for the way he lifted others up without ever asking for praise. When a fire tore through town in 1990, Mr. Thomas rallied neighbors to rebuild homes, his hands steady as he handed out supplies. When a shy girl dreamed of college but had no money, he quietly paid her way, never speaking of it again. He believed kindness was the truest strength, a lesson carved into him by years of seeing both the worst and best in people. Every night, Mr. Thomas strolled to Emma's Café, his steps slow but sure. No matter if the sun blazed or snow fell, he'd sit at his corner table by the window, order a warm glass of milk, and watch the world outside with quiet contentment. The cafe's regulars expected him like clockwork, and when that door jingled, they'd nod, knowing it was him. His meals were always on the house, not out of pity, but because Emma and her staff wanted to honor him. "Mr. Thomas has given us everything," Emma would say, wiping down the counter. "A plate of food is the least we can do." He'd smile, say a soft thank you, and accept their kindness, knowing it meant as much to them as it did to him. One chilly evening in October 2024, Mr. Thomas walked his usual path, the breeze rustling leaves across the pavement. Orange and yellow trees glowed under the streetlights, and the town felt as calm as ever. But as he neared Emma's Café, something felt off, like a shadow creeping over the warmth of the place. Inside, the usual hum of voices was gone, replaced by a tense hush that made his steps slow. The sky above Willowbrook had darkened, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. Streetlights flickered, casting uneven pools of light onto the sidewalks, and a faint hum stirred the air. At first, it was just a low rumble, but it grew louder, angrier, until it roared like a storm breaking loose. 6 motorcycles tore down the main road, their engines screaming through the quiet night. Townsfolk peeked from their windows, confused and uneasy. This wasn't the kind of noise Willowbrook knew. The bikes screeched to a stop outside Emma's Café, their headlights slicing through the dark. 6 men climbed off, their heavy boots thudding on the ground, their leather jackets glinting with odd patches. They weren't travelers passing through or curious visitors. They carried trouble in their smirks and cold stares. No one in Willowbrook had seen them before, and their presence felt like a crack in the town's peaceful shell. Inside the café, forks paused, and conversations died as the door swung open. The bell above it rang, but this time, it sounded sharp, like a warning. The men strode in, their laughter rough and loud, filling the room with a weight that pressed on everyone's chest. A woman near the door clutched her mug tighter. A man across the room stared at his plate, avoiding their eyes. Emma, behind the counter, gripped her rag, her face tight but silent, knowing a wrong word could spark trouble. One of the men, a tall figure with a wolf tattoo curling up his arm, scanned the room with a sneer. He pulled off his helmet, revealing sharp cheekbones and eyes that gleamed with menace. His name was Carter, and he moved like he owned the place. His steps slow and deliberate. Mr. Thomas sat at his usual table, his coat draped over the chair, his hands resting calmly on the menu. He didn't need to read it. He ordered the same meal every night, but he opened it anyway. Unbothered by the noise, Carter's eyes landed on him, and a cruel grin spread across his face. The air grew heavier, like a storm about to break. As Carter sauntered over, no one dared to speak, The other customers kept their heads down, their breaths shallow. Carter loomed over Mr. Thomas's table, one hand on his hip, the other tapping the edge of the chair. Mr. Thomas didn't flinch, didn't look up, just waited for his food as if the man wasn't there. That calm sparked something in Carter, a flicker of irritation, like a match catching flame. With a quick jerk, Carter snatched the plate of steaming pie a waitress had just set down. The clatter made everyone jump, and a bit of crust crumbled onto the table. Carter held the plate high, twirling it like a prize, his grin widening. "Want your pie, old man?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Mr. Thomas looked at the plate, then met Carter's eyes, his gaze steady and unafraid. The cafe was silent, every ear straining, every heart pounding. Carter leaned closer, his breath sour with smoke. "If you want to eat, you'll get us some food first." His buddies laughed, a harsh, grating sound that rolled through the room like thunder. One of them, a stocky man with greasy hair, stepped up, cracking his knuckles. "Better listen, Grandpa," he said, slamming a hand on the table. "We're hungry." The other bikers closed in, their shadows stretching across the floor, boxing Mr. Thomas in. Emma's hands shook behind the counter, but she stayed quiet, her eyes darting to the phone on the wall. The customers shrank in their seats, some staring at their cold coffee, others pretending to read the menu. No one wanted to be the next target, and the fear in the room was thick enough to choke on. Carter tossed the plate back onto the table with a clank, pie sliding across it. He leaned down, his face inches from Mr. Thomas's. "Order us a meal, or you'll regret it." Another biker grabbed Mr. Thomas's shoulder, squeezing hard, his fingers digging into the old man's coat. But Mr. Thomas didn't budge, didn't blink, his face as calm as a still pond. That calm unnerved Carter, who was used to making people cower with a glance. "You deaf or just stupid?" Carter snapped, slamming his fist on the table. The noise echoed, but Mr. Thomas only tilted his head slightly, like he was studying a noisy child. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, his movements careful, deliberate. Carter smirked, turning to his crew. "Look at this guy, probably fishing for a dime to pay us off." The bikers roared with laughter, one of them slapping the table, another mimicking Mr. Thomas's slow reach. But what Mr. Thomas pulled out wasn't money, it was an old, scratched-up phone. He flipped it open, pressed a single button, and held it to his ear. The laughter stopped, replaced by confused murmurs among the bikers. "Calling the cops, old man?" Carter said, his grin faltering just a bit. Mr. Thomas didn't answer, didn't even glance at him, just stared ahead as the phone rang. Carter's smirk faded as he leaned closer, trying to see the screen. His eyes widened, and his hand froze mid-air, like he'd been struck. The name on the phone wasn't the sheriff or a neighbor, it was something else. Something that turned Carter's face pale. He stepped back, his boots scuffing the floor, his bravado crumbling. The other bikers noticed, their laughter dying as they crowded around, peering at the screen. One of them gasped, another cursed under his breath, and the room seemed to shrink around them. Carter's hands shook, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night. Who are you?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Thomas said nothing, just held the phone, his expression unchanged. The bikers exchanged glances, their confidence gone, replaced by a fear they couldn't name. The cafe was deathly quiet now, every customer watching, unsure what was happening but feeling the shift. Carter's eyes darted to the door, like he wanted to bolt, but his feet stayed glued to the floor. The phone call connected, and a deep, gravelly voice came through, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Carter," it said, slow and deliberate, "you're bothering my friend." Carter's knees buckled, and he grabbed the table to steady himself. The other bikers backed away, their faces ashen, like they'd seen a ghost. No one in Willowbrook knew the voice, but the bikers did, and it terrified them. Mr. Thomas finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. "You should leave." Carter opened his mouth, but no words came out, his throat was too dry. The voice on the phone continued, calm but heavy with warning. "You know who I am, Carter, and you know what happens if you don't listen." The bikers stumbled backward, tripping over chairs in their haste to retreat. One of them dropped his helmet, leaving it rolling on the floor as they scrambled for the door. Carter was the last to move. His eyes locked on Mr. Thomas, who hadn't moved an inch. I didn't know," Carter mumbled, his voice breaking. "I swear, I didn't know." Mr. Thomas just nodded, the phone still at his ear, his gaze never wavering. The door slammed shut behind the bikers, the bell jingling wildly as they fled. Outside, engines roared to life, and the motorcycles screeched away, their lights vanishing into the night. The cafe stayed silent for a long moment, everyone too stunned to speak. Emma rushed over, her hands trembling as she touched Mr. Thomas's arm. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice thick with worry. Mr. Thomas smiled, gentle as ever, and patted her hand. "I'm fine, Emma, just fine." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and picked up his fork. Taking a bite of his pie, the customers stared, whispering to each other, trying to piece together what had just happened. Who had Mr. Thomas called? And why had it scared those men so badly? The truth was bigger than anyone in Willowbrook could guess. The number Mr. Vincent had dialed wasn't just any number, it belonged to Victor Kane. Victor Kane, a name that sent shivers through the underworld. A man whose shadow loomed over cities and empires. He was a kingpin, a figure so feared that even hardened criminals whispered his name with dread. But long ago, before Kane was a legend, he was just a scrappy kid with nothing but ambition. Back then, Mr. Thomas had seen something in him, potential, maybe, or a spark of good beneath the roughness. Mr. Thomas had given him a chance, a job, a roof over his head when no one else would. Kane never forgot it, carrying that debt like a weight, vowing to repay it someday. Over the years, Kane rose to power, his name becoming a myth, but his loyalty to Mr. Thomas never wavered. That night, when Mr. Thomas called, Kane answered, his voice cutting through the miles like a blade. He didn't need to shout or threaten, his name alone was enough. Carter and his crew knew Kane's reputation: cross him, and you'd vanish without a trace. The warning was clear: leave Mr. Thomas alone, or face a reckoning. By the time the bikers hit the edge of town, they were shaking, their bravado shattered. They'd never come back to Willowbrook. Not after that call. Inside Emma's cafe, life slowly returned to normal. The clink of dishes and soft chatter filling the air again. Mr. Thomas finished his pie, sipped his milk, and left a tip under his plate. Same as always. No one asked him about the call, and he didn't offer to explain. To Willowbrook, he was still Mr. Thomas, kind, quiet, and steady as ever. But that night, they'd glimpsed something deeper, a hint of the man who carried a past no one could fully know. As he walked home under the starlit sky, the town felt a little safer, a little warmer, because of him. And somewhere far away, Victor Kane hung up his phone, a rare smile crossing his face. He'd kept his promise to an old friend, and that was enough.